Thank you once again for joining us, everybody. This time we're going to talk a little SLIAC men's basketball 1990s All-Decade Edition. Joining us once again, the Hall of Famer, Terry Logue. Terry, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great.
Well, what do you say we head over to the hardwood, talk some men's hoops?
Always willing to do that. Just love talking about the early years of the St. Louis Intercollegiate Athletic Conference.
Well, when you're talking early years of the conference, the first team you're going to mention, I'm sure, Blackburn College. Can you talk about the run they had at the start of the decade?
Well, Blackburn just dominated the conference in the 90s, early 90s, when the conference first got founded. And yeah, it all starts with the head coach and athletic director, Dr. Ira Zeff. Ira, a great individual, super gentleman, phenomenal coach. He was a three-time coach of the year. And, you know, I want to mention that they played in the National Small College Tournament one of those years and finished fourth. And so their program was good.
Yes, yeah, indeed. Another program that really stood out in the 90s, Fontbonne University, back then Fontbonne College. Can you talk about the Griffins?
Well, the Fontbonne Griffins are coached by the late Lee McKinney, and Lee started the athletic program at Fontbonne, and he was another guy that was just, you know, a super nice guy, very active, did everything for the student athletes. In the 90s, they won 2 league titles and 2 tournament titles, and I think we forgot to mention that for Blackburn, they won 3 league championships and 3 tournament titles too. So, you know, the numbers stand out for both Blackburn and Fontbonne. You know, ironically, Lee just had very consistent teams.
Yeah,
and he had some very good players, as we can talk about here in a minute.
That's right. As we move into talking about some individual performers on men's basketball, I think we got to start off with arguably the greatest player ever to step on a SLIAC basketball court, Henry Shannon from Maryville University. What do you remember about Henry?
Well, Henry was the newcomer of the year in 95, 96. He was a 2-time player of the year, 4-time first team all-conference performer. And if you look at the career stat numbers, Henry Shannon is still the career leader in scoring, and I believe in free throws. and he was a defensive player as well. I mean, he was just the consummate player. And you might even ask, how did he get to Maryville?
Right. Yeah, like you said, if you look at some of his numbers, just astronomical. And then 30 years later, they're still at the top of the record books. That's quite a feat.
You know, he was just a great player. You know, I might mention, you know, he was a 4-time scoring leader in the country. So he didn't just get better. He came in and scored, and throughout his 4-year career kept scoring.
Right, that impact from day one. Couple other standout performers. I know Kevin Green from Blackburn, as you mentioned, helped lead them a couple titles. What do you remember about Kevin Green?
Well, Kevin Green was one of those players that really just dominated the court, and he was on the first 2 teams for Blackburn, and they only had him for a couple of years in the conference. And you know, he was a 2-time tournament MVP and a 2-time all-conference performer. And I had the opportunity of seeing him play and you know, take it to my Blue Jays.
Speaking of your Blue Jays and getting the chance to see a stellar player real up close and personal, one of the Blue Jays I wanted to ask you about, Jason White. Can you tell us a little about him?
Well, you know, Jason was, again, one of those players that would put the team on his back, and he was a 3-time rebounding champion in the conference. You know, he still holds the rebounding and scoring records at Westminster College. He was a 4-time all-conference performer. He was the a co-MVP player of the year in '96. He shared that with Cole Johnson of Greenville. And, you know, he was just, you know, a fun player to be around. He was 6'6", and, you know, he took Westminster to the tournament championship, and on the road came away with a victory over McMurray, and that vaulted Westminster into the first NCAA appearance for a conference school in '95.
Well, that's a great little tidbit there. Before we wrap up, what are some other players that you were really entertained by on the basketball court?
Well, when you look at some of the schools, in addition to the ones we've mentioned, you got to look at some kids from Fontbonne. Mark Cronk, a four-time all-conference performer. Jason Malott led the conference in assists a couple of times, a three-time all-conference performer. Chris Parker from Blackburn, he was player of the year in '95, a three-time all-conference performer. Player of the year in '94, Stacy Ross from Fontbonne. Of course, he only played there, I believe, just 1 year. Roy Woods from Fontbonne, player of the year in '95, a two-time first-team all-conference player, and he was, you know, he was a dominating player. Travis Reisman was player of the year in '97 from Blackburn. He was a three-time all-conference performer. You know, so when you go back and you talk about the successful teams, they've got some good players on their roster.
That's sure. I'm sure it was an entertaining time back in the '90s to watch all these players on the basketball court. Well, thank you, Terry, for joining us and talking us a little men's basketball. We'll talk to you again later this week for a little SLIAC women's basketball action.
I'm looking forward to that.